Hi everyone, welcome to Tech with Robert. We get started with the T-SQL course. Today we're going to talk about user-defined functions. I'm going to show you how to create these functions, why you would need them, how to execute them, and the different ways, the type of values that you can return from a function. So, don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you like what I do, and let's dive right in. And so, what is a function? So a function, if you've been working with any programming language before, you have most likely heard of functions. And so a function is a way of writing code once and then reusing it many times when you need to. So instead of having to rewrite the logic all of the time for every time you need to use it, you can simply write your logic one time and then reuse it in later occasions. And so what do I mean by that? So I've taken an example, some example data here, and feel free to run this code if you want to follow along. And so I'm going to create a function, and this function is going to take two parameters. So when we call the function, we're going to pass in two numbers, and then we're going to perform a addition and get the result. And this is a very simple function, but the purpose here is to demonstrate what a function is and how we can write it and what the syntax is. So think of when you're using the left function and the right, or the trim, left trim, right trim, all of these functions are also functions. So you know that whenever you want to get the first letter from a string, you would use left function. Or whatever you need to search in a string, start from specific positions and extract certain data, you would use the substring. So that is also function. So you don't have to run the full behind the scene codes all the time. You just simply call that function, and for every time you need to do it, you call that same function instead of rewriting the logic. So the way to create a function is we write create function, and then we need to specify a schema. We're going to say dbo for now here, dbo, and then we say the function name. So I like to prefix my functions with the word fx. This is what I learned from math, but I believe that the official SQL Server best practice or most commonly used sentence is UDF and then the function name like this. It's not very important for this one. I'm just going to write fx add numbers. Okay, we follow that by parentheses. And inside the parentheses here, we're going to specify the parameters that we expect to take into the function. So when we call this function, we need to specify with what values the function has to take in, work with, and then eventually in the function, we're going to write what we expect as the output. So this is sort of the input to the function. So we can say a variable, you start here with an add sign like this, and we name it variable like num1, and then we specify the data type, which is going to be an integer. And then since we're going to take two numbers and add them, we can do the same thing here with num2, also an integer. And then after here we are writing returns, and we must specify the data type that this function is going to return. So in this case, since we're going to take two whole numbers and add them together, we're going to return a whole number. So we're going to return an integer. So we can write returns integer and then as. Here we have a begin and an end block, and all of the SQL statement is going to go inside the begin and the the end block here. So we write the create function and then the function name followed by the parentheses where we have the input parameters to the function, the input we're giving to the function. We specify what the return type is for the function, and then we have a begin and an end block, and everything between that block is the statements that we're going to run. So in this case, since we're going to take in two numbers as an input, we also want to display an output. So we need to declare a variable that is going to hold the output, in this case the result. So we can write declare and then result int like this, and we can say that we can select the result is going to be num1 plus num2. Okay, and then what we need to do is we need to specify that we want to return the result, right? And then here we have the add. And so now when we run this here, we will see that we have created a function. And so if we want to take a look at the function, we can find them inside of under databases, go to the adventure to the database. Then under programmability, you have something called functions. And in this case, we can create table valued functions, and I'm going to go over them in a minute, but we can create scalar valued functions. So scalar valued functions is essentially a function that returns a scalar value, returns a value like we did here. We are giving an input to a function and we are returning a scalar value, a number. But we can also create a function where we can pass in a parameter and the result is going to be a table, a query. But we're going to talk more about that in a bit. And so now that we have created our function, we would want to try it out. So how can we use this function? How can we call it? We can try with a simple select statement for now. So we can just say that we want to select, and then we need to specify the whole function name here. So we're going to specify we want to select that number, and we follow it by an open and closing parenthesis. So here we're going to take in our inputs here. So it's going to take number 1 and number 2, and it's going to take these two numbers and add them together and display a result. So if we write in and we want to say a 10 and then a 10, we should receive the value 20, right? Because it's going to take 10 and then it's going to do plus 10, which will give us 20. So we can try this out a couple of times here. But I think you get the idea here. I get 10 plus 10 is 20. Here we get 160. Here we get 110, and here 155, and so on. And so I'm going to create another function here, so that one that can be more like used in the real world. So say that we have a pretty complex formula that we find ourselves writing all of the time in our code on many columns. We could create a function for that. But in this case, let's say that we have a sales amount and a sales quantity field, and we want to create a function instead of just simply adding these two, taking sales quantity times sales quantity all the time. We can just create a function which would be to calculate total sales. So again, we would say create function. I'm going to write DBO here, and I'm going to write fx calculate total sales, right? And what we need here in the parentheses is we're going to take a sales amount and a sales quantity like this. It's going to return int, and we can say that we want to declare the total sales as an integer, and we can select the total sales is going to be the sales amount times the sales quantity, and we want to return the total sales like this. So if we now run this query here, we see we created that function. And so what we can do here is, let's say for example, if we still have the sample sales table from the previous lecture, we can say we want to say the sales ID, sales amount, sales quantity. Let's say from sample sales, okay? And so now we see that, okay, we have the sales amount and we have the sales quantity. So we want to create a new function called total sales, and we can use our new function. So we can say dbo dot fx calculate total sales, and we take the sales amount and the sales quantity like this. We name it total sales amount. So now if we see for each row, it's going to take the sales amount times the sales quantity, and now we can reuse this function. So imagine if the calculation was like, oh, you take A times B, and then you need to subtract C times D squared root 2, and then so you have a pretty complex calculation, and you find yourself writing that calculation many times. You don't need to always rewrite the logic for it, so you can create a function and then reuse it. I'm going to create a last function here, a scalar function, which I actually used today in my work. It's when you're working with data warehouses, you don't want to display unknowns and null values in dimension data. So you usually take, if it's a null or a empty value, you convert it to an NA or unknown, for example. So we can have fx set NA, and we're going to take an input string, which is going to be of a varchar, like this, and we're going to returns and varchar here. We're going to begin and here, and so we're going to declare the output string, which is also going to be a varchar. And here I'm going to select that the output string is going to be, first we say null if the input string. So if it's a null, we change it to an empty string, and then when it's an empty string, we convert it to a NA, like this. And then we say return output string, like this. So we run this function here, and I'm going to show you. So let's say that we say select, and we have null as value 1, and then we have empty string as value 2. You see, we don't, this doesn't look nice, so we can say simply we want to take the fx set NA, and if we pass in a null value here, or if we pass in an empty string here, we should get NA in both of the columns that we do. So we are handling, but we have created one function that where we can handle null values and empty strings. So the last type of function I want to show you is, by the way, these three functions are all scalar valued functions. So it returns a scalar value, but as I mentioned earlier, we can also create a function that returns a table. And so the syntax is a little bit different, but quite the same as well. So we say DBO, we want to say a fx, and then here I actually used to say fx, then we sales year, and then I like to have a suffix with table like this, so we know it's a table. Same thing here, we add the parameter we want, and for this case we're going to run the function, have a year as an input, and then return the sales data for that year. So here we need to say returns table, but we don't need the as begin and end statements here. So here after the returns table, we will write and say as return, and then the return is going to be the select statement. So we can write, we want to select the order date, let's say customer key, let's say we want sales amount and order quantity, right? From DBO fact internet sales, and we can say where the year of the order date is going to match the year that we have in the input here. And so now when we run this query here, we see that we have a table here, and the way we call this table is we use it in a select statement. So we say select, and let's say we just, for now we say select everything from, and then we say dbo dot fx sales year table, and here we specify the year we want to call. So when we run this, we see that we're going to get this data here, but it's going to, in the where, it's going to say where the year of the order date is equal to the year that we put in, and we put in 2010. So it's going to select every sales transaction from 2010. And the funny thing with this is we can use this as a regular table, so we can even give this an alias to say, let's say as SY for a sales year. And so here we can select we don't have to select everything. We can treat this like a regular table. So we could say the order date and the sales amount, and we could still run this. And so this was it, guys. Thank you for watching. This was it on user-defined functions. In the next lecture, we're going to begin talking about stored procedures. So I will see you guys next there.